You are listening to Bedtime Dreamy Tales. Share and subscribe our channel. Story title: The Little Mermaid. Part 2b, The Prince and the Sea. If human beings are not drowned, asked the Little Mermaid, can they live forever? Do they never die as we do here in the sea? Yes, replied the old lady. They must also die, and their term of life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live to 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we only become the foam on the surface of the water, and we have not even a resting place down here of those we love. We have no immortal souls, and we shall never live again. But human beings have a soul which lives forever, even after the body has turned to dust. It rises up through the clear, pure air beyond the glittering stars. As we rise out of the water and behold all the land of the earth, they rise to unknown and glorious regions which we shall never see. Why do we not have an immortal soul? Asked the Little Mermaid mournfully. I would give gladly all the hundreds of years that I have to live to be a human being only for one day and to have the hope of knowing the happiness of that glorious world above the stars. You must not think of that, said the old woman. We feel ourselves to be much happier and much better off than human beings. So I shall cease to exist, said the Little Mermaid, and as the foam of the sea, I shall be driven about, never again to hear the music of the waves or see the pretty flowers or the red sun. Is there anything I can do to win an immortal soul? No, said the old woman, unless a man were to love you so much that you are more to him than his father or mother. And if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, then his soul would glide into your body, and you would obtain a share in the future happiness of mankind. He would give a soul to you and retain his own as well. But this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which is considered beautiful among us, is thought on earth to be quite ugly. They do not know any better and think it necessary to have two stout props, which they call legs, to be handsome. The Little Mermaid sighed and looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail. Let us be happy, said the old lady, and dart and spring about during the 300 years that we have to live, which is really quite long enough. After that, we can rest ourselves all the better. This evening, we are going to have a court ball. It was one of those splendid sights that can never be seen on earth. The walls and ceiling of the large ballroom were of thick, transparent crystal. Hundreds of colossal shells, some of a deep red and others of a grass green, stood on each side in rows with blue fire in them, which lighted up the whole saloon and shone through the walls, so the sea was also illuminated. Innumerable fishes, great and small, swam past the crystal walls. Some scales glowed with a purple brilliance, and others shone like silver and gold. A broad stream flowed through the halls, and in it danced the mermen and mermaids to the music of their own sweet singing. No one on earth has such a lovely voice as theirs. The Little Mermaid sang more sweetly than all of them. The whole court applauded her with hands and tails. For a moment, her heart felt quite gay, for she knew she had the loveliest voice of any on earth or in the sea. But she soon thought again of the world above her, for she could not forget the charming prince or her sorrow that she had not an immortal soul like his. So she crept away silently out of her father's palace. While everything within was gladness and song, she sat in her little garden, sorrowful and alone. Then she heard the bugle sounding through the water and thought, "He is certainly sailing above, he on whom my wishes depend, and in whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. I will venture all for him and to win an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go to the sea witch, whom I have always been so much afraid of, but she can give me counsel and help." The Little Mermaid left her garden and took the road to the foaming whirlpools, behind which the sorceress lived. She had never been that way before. No flowers or grass grew there. Nothing but bare, grey, sandy ground stretched out to the whirlpool, where the water, like foaming mill wheels, whirled round everything it seized and cast it into the fathomless deep. The Little Mermaid had to pass through the midst of these crushing whirlpools to reach the sea witch's dominions. For a long distance, the only road lay right across a quantity of warm, bubbling mire, which the witch called her Turf Moor. Beyond this stood her house, in the center of a strange forest, where all the trees and flowers were polypi, half animals and half plants. They looked like serpents with 100 heads growing out of the ground. The branches were long, slimy arms with fingers like flexible worms, moving limb after limb from the root to the top. All they could reach in the sea they seized and held fast, so nothing escaped from their clutches. The Little Mermaid was so alarmed at what she saw that she stood still, and her heart beat with fear. She was very nearly turning back, but she thought of the prince and the human soul for which she longed, and her courage returned. She fastened her long, flowing hair around her head so the polypi might not seize it. She laid her hands together across her bosom and darted forward as a fish shoots through the water, between the supple arms and fingers of the ugly polypi, which were stretched out on each side of her. She saw that each held in its grasp something it had seized with its numerous little arms, as if they were iron bands. The white skeletons of human beings who had perished at sea and sunk into the deep waters, skeletons of land animals, oars, rudders, and chests of ships lay tightly grasped by their clinging arms. Even a little mermaid, whom they had caught and held, seemed the most shocking to the little princess. She now came to a space of marshy ground in the wood where large, fat water snakes rolled in the mire, showing their bodies. In the midst of this spot stood a house built with the bones of shipwrecked human beings. The sea witch sat there, allowing a toad to eat from her mouth, just as people sometimes feed a canary with a piece of sugar. She called the ugly water snakes her little chickens and allowed them to crawl all over her. "I know what you want," said the sea witch. "It is very foolish of you, but you shall have your way, and it will bring you to sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail and have two supports instead, like human beings on earth, so the young prince may fall in love with you and you may have an immortal soul." Then the witch laughed so loud and disgustingly that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground, wriggling about. "You are just in time," said the witch, "for after sunrise tomorrow, I would not be able to help you until the end of another year. I will prepare a draft for you, with which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise and sit down on the shore and drink it. Your tail will then disappear and shrink into what mankind calls legs. You will feel great pain, as if a sword were passing through you. But all who see you will say that you are the prettiest little human being they ever saw. You will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly. But at every step you take, it will feel as if you were treading upon sharp knives and that the blood must flow. If you will bear all this, I will help you." "Yes, I will," said the little princess in a trembling voice as she thought of the prince and the immortal soul. "But think again," said the witch. "Once your shape has become like a human being, you can no more be a mermaid. You will never return through the water to your sisters or your father's palace again. And if you do not win the love of the prince, so that he is willing to forget his father and mother for your sake and to love you with his whole soul, allowing the priest to join your hands so you may be man and wife, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first morning after he marries another, your heart will break, and you will become foam on the crest of the waves." "I will do it," said the little mermaid, and she became pale as a ghost. "But I must be paid also," said the witch, "and it is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, and you believe you will be able to charm the prince with it also. But this voice you must give to me. The best thing you possess will I have for the price of my draft. My own blood must be mixed with it, so it may be as sharp as a two-edged sword." "But if you take away my voice," said the little mermaid, "what is left for me?" "Your beautiful form, your graceful walk, and your expressive eyes. Surely, with these, you can win a man's heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue, so I may cut it off as my payment. Then you shall have the powerful draft." "It shall be," said the little mermaid. Then the witch placed her cauldron on the fire to prepare the magic draft. "Cleanliness is a good thing," said she, scouring the vessel with snakes tied together in a large knot. Then she pricked herself in the chest and let the dark blood drop into it. The steam that rose formed itself into such horrible shapes that no one could look at them without fear. Every moment, the witch threw something else into the vessel, and when it began to boil, the sound was like the weeping of a crocodile. When at last the magic draught was ready, it looked like the clearest water. "There it is for you," said the witch. Then she cut off the mermaid's tongue so she became unable to speak and would never again talk or sing. "If the polypi should seize hold of you as you return through the wood," said the witch, "throw over them a few drops of the potion and their fingers will be torn into 1,000 pieces." But the Little Mermaid had no occasion to do this, for the polypi sprang back in terror when they caught sight of the glittering draught, which shone in her hand like a twinkling star. The Little Mermaid passed quickly through the wood and the marsh and between the rushing whirlpools. She saw that the torches in her father's palace's ballroom were extinguished and everyone within was asleep. But she did not venture to go into them, for now she was unable to speak and going to leave them forever. She felt as if her heart would break. She stole into the garden, took a flower from each of her sister's flower beds, kissed her hand 1,000 times toward the palace, and then rose up through the dark blue waters. The sun had not yet risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace and approached the beautiful marble steps. The moon shone clear and bright. The Little Mermaid drank the magic draught and felt as if a two-edged sword went through her delicate body. She fell into a swoon and lay as if lifeless. When the sun arose and shone over the sea, she recovered and felt a sharp pain. Before her stood the handsome young prince. He fixed his coal-black eyes upon her so earnestly that she cast down her own. She then became aware that her fish's tail was gone and that she had as pretty a pair of white legs and tiny feet as any little maiden could have. But she had no clothes, so she wrapped herself in her long, thick hair. The prince asked her who she was and where she came from. She looked at him mildly and sorrowfully with her deep blue eyes, but could not speak. Every step she took was as the witch had said it would be. She felt as if treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives, but she bore it willingly and stepped as lightly by the prince's side as a soap bubble, so that he and all who saw her wondered at her graceful swaying movements. She was soon arrayed in costly robes of silk and muslin and was the most beautiful creature in the palace. But she was unable to speak or sing. Beautiful female performers, dressed in silk and gold, stepped forward and sang before the prince and his royal parents. One sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. This was great sorrow to the Little Mermaid. She knew how much more sweetly she could once sing and thought, "Oh, if he could only know that! I have given away my voice forever to be with him." The performers next performed some pretty fairy-like dances to the sound of beautiful music. The Little Mermaid raised her lovely white arms, stood on the tips of her toes, glided over the floor, and danced as no one yet had been able to dance. At each moment, her beauty became more revealed, and her expressive eyes appealed more directly to the heart than the songs of the performers. Everyone was enchanted, especially the prince, who called her his little foundling. She danced again quite readily to please him, though each time her foot touched the floor, it seemed as if she trod on sharp knives. The prince said she should remain with him always, and she received permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. He had a page's dress made for her, so she might accompany him on horseback. They rode together through the sweet-scented woods, where the green boughs touched their shoulders and the little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed with the prince to the tops of high mountains, and although her tender feet bled so that even her steps were marked, she only laughed and followed him until they could see the clouds beneath them, looking like a flock of birds traveling to distant lands. While at the prince's palace, and when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps. It eased her burning feet to bathe them in the cold seawater, and she thought of all those below in the deep. Once during the night, her sisters came up arm in arm, singing sorrowfully as they floated on the water. She beckoned to them, and they recognized her and told her how she had grieved them. After that, they came to the same place every night. Once, she saw her old grandmother in the distance, who had not been to the surface of the sea for many years, and the old Sea King, her father, with his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands towards her, but they did not venture as close to the land as her sisters did. If you like this story, please give this video a like. For more stories, go to bedtimedreamytales.com. See you in the next story.